Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to part 3 of our Marine Engine Rebuilding Tips and Info webinar series. My name is Amanda Goyette. I am an admin assistant with AERA, and I will be in the background moderating today's event with my colleague, Rob Monroe.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, Rob Monroe here. I look after membership and technical development at AERA. And like Amanda mentioned, we're going to be in the background today to answer any questions you've got. You're in for a real treat today. Chris has been gathering this marine information for over 30 years. And this is part 3 of a series that we've done for marine webinars. And like I mentioned, you're in for a real treat. This stuff is not easy to get. We rely on Chris on the tech line. He's our marine go-to guy. So I encourage you to grab a snack, grab some water, and buckle down. And we're going to get into some really good tech info. So if any of you are heading to the PRI show here in December, make sure to get in a day early on December 11th. So that's a Wednesday before the show. We are having the Engine Professional Industry Conference. We kind of nicknamed it EPIC. And again, there's going to be 4 really high-level presentations at EPIC. There's breakfast, there's lunch. Even our speaker today, Chris Hamann, is doing a presentation at EPIC, and it's going to be on diagnostics and some of the stuff that he's really good at. So I would encourage you to get registered for that, and you can go over to our website at aera.org. You'll see a tab there to be able to register for EPIC, and this is presented by Motor State Distributing. So looking forward to seeing everybody there. Really good turnout last year. That was the first one we did last year, and so this year we're looking forward to seeing everybody. All right, so like I mentioned, Chris Hamann, he's the president of Lakeland Auto Marine in Port Clinton, Ohio. So Port Clinton is a real marine boating town, and he is our resident. Anything aspects related to marine, anything from transmissions to diagnostics to engine, he's our go-to guy. So Chris, how you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. How are you guys doing?
Really, really good. Looking forward to your presentation today. And screen looks good, Chris. Like it all looks great.
Perfect. That's what I was just going to check, make sure we shared it, so we're all set. So yeah. Well, thank you, Rob and Amanda. Hey, my name is Chris Hamann. This is going to be part 3 of our marine engine rebuilding tips and info. We had a lot of stuff, so we broke it up into 3 2-hour segments. Hopefully, we should be able to get through it today. If not, maybe there'll be part 4. Who knows? But just a little bit about me. Been here 34 years. Been a member a long time of the AERA. Very great organization. We got 10 bays. Most of our work is automotive repair. We do machine shop. We do marine engine rebuilding, diagnostics. Do a lot with Mercury Marine, Volvo Penta, that sort of stuff. So there's my contact information. If you have any questions on anything I talk about, there's my email right here. So don't forget chrish@lakelandautomarine.com, or you can contact the AERA. They can get a hold of me too. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. I do a little bit of instructing at a vocational school near me in Milan, Ohio. Mostly focuses on engine drivability and diagnostic issues using lab scopes and scan tools. So this is something we do. If you're a really hardcore Marine and you're a technician and you want to take it to the next level, contact me and we can get you hooked up on these classes. They're great. We do all kinds of interesting stuff. We've got like 14 test engines and test tanks, and we bug stuff. We do all kinds of things with them. So it's really good training. Something, it's very hard to get, because honestly, if you're an independent, if you're not a dealer, it's very hard to get information. Trust me. So we work hard at that to try to make sure that to get the stuff. So here's my goals and objectives for this session. So I want to focus on how we test run the engines in the shop, and that's assuming you get everything. Okay. I know if you've followed along before, we talk about long blocks and complete engines. I know some machine shops don't want all the junk, as we like to call it, but the problem is that junk is where the problems usually are and why the engine failed. So we'll talk a little bit about water reversion. All right, that's where water gets on top of the piston. First thing everybody likes to do is tear the heads off, and that's the last thing you do. Okay, because everybody thinks you got water in the oil on top of the pistons. It's a cracked head, it's a blown head gasket, which yes, that can do that, but we need to do a little bit of diagnostics before we start doing that. Or if we get an engine in our shop, right, a long block that's got a bent connecting rod, got water in the oil, if I just do the long block and fix the bent rod, and the marina or whoever's doing the work doesn't check the exhaust manifold or some other things, I probably got a warranty situation on my hands. Okay, so we want to try to prevent that. We'll talk about detonation, okay, which in my opinion is the #1 failure of a marine engine. Boats are under such a huge load, huge. And, fuel system problems, propping, boat problems, all attribute to this. So I want to touch on, we'll show some examples of it. This is not a detonation class, but I want to go over it. I'm going to show you how we sea trial the vessel. To me, this is the single most important thing of the job, is right here. It's very, very important that the boat gets sea trialed. If you don't do it, I'd like to hope that somebody does, because if you don't sea trial the vessel, you're asking for a huge, huge problem. You'd be surprised how many marinas in that they don't sea trial anything. It's like they go to Monopoly and collect the $200 past go, and they don't care. They hand the guy a bill for 10 grand, 12 grand, whatever, and they just run it on a hose, right? And if you don't make sure this thing's propped right and all this other stuff, you got problems. Okay. Speaking of props, we're going to talk about why a vessel may not achieve top RPM. It doesn't always have to be the prop, but we have to make sure that the engine is running correctly. All right, and everything on the boat is correct. I'm going to spend just a few minutes on this HVS ignition. This is the high voltage switch. This is that plastic distributor, well, they're all plastic, but the plastic distributor housing. This is a tricky situation. It's probably right now one of the more common things I see get screwed up. So, and we'll spend just a shade on inboard transmissions, what you can and can't do. This is another hot topic that a lot of people get confused. They don't understand that there's reversing ratios, and they think you can reverse prop rotation with transmissions. Some of them you can, some of you can't. But I've got it all. I've got it all written down here in our presentation. We're going to go over all of it, because sometimes a guy will come in and says, "Hey, I want a left-hand rotation engine," right? And all of a sudden it's not what the customer wants, and then we, the machine shop, can get blamed sometimes. So I just want to make sure you guys know what this is, because then you can fire questions back to your customer, before you decide to build an engine from scratch. So let's talk about test running. All right, I made up this little panel. It's just a piece of aluminum. It's got some gauges. I know you'll probably make fun of me, the volt gauge, the needle already fell off, but that's already been changed since this picture. But I make this dash up with a tack in that. And most engines have a 10-pin connector, depending on year. Newer stuff has 14-pin. And really newer stuff is all different, okay? But this is the most popular stuff that I think most people are going to see. This 10-pin connector has been a base marine connector for many, many years. Okay, we're talking probably from the late 70s all the way through the middle 2000s. Anything that has catalytic converters does not have this plug. But Volvo Penta, Marine Power, Crusader, Mercury Marine, they all use this for years and years and years, which is handy. Okay, and then they went to this 14-pin, which is like what some of the cat motors have now too, in 2007. And I put some numbers here that you can buy. All right, and if you ever have questions on this, I'd be happy to help. If you're not sure how to start an engine, you can always send me an email, and I'll be glad to help you. But the two things that I'm concerned about are starter, okay, which is pin 7 on a 10-pin, and pin 5 is ignition. So if I just got my handy dandy jumper wires, okay, and I got the battery cables, and oh yeah, by the way, this is the other thing. I see so many guys just hook up a jump pack or something to the starter post, and they jump pack to the ground stud on the flywheel housing. Get regular battery cables, tighten them up. You lose so much resistance through, jumper packs and stuff. Do it right. Get a regular 12-volt battery, bolt it up to the starter and all that. And trust me, you're going to have a way better experience, especially if it's EFI. But I take my jumper wire. I put one wire here on pin 5. That's my ignition. If it's fuel injection, I should hear the fuel pump prime. Okay. If not, I may not hear anything. If it's a carbureted engine. And then when I put power to pin 7, the engine should crank over. Now I could go directly to the crank terminal, the S terminal, the starter tube. That's up to you. But this is when I see this plug 5 and 7 burned in my head, right? I can buy this adapter. It's not that expensive, and it converts a 10-pin connector into a 14-pin connector. All right, so I can get in here and do what I need to do. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but if you need them, I can get them for you. But this covers a lot right here. I just give you this wiring diagram. This is kind of handy. I've got you saw my homemade gauge panel here. I love to use this. And this tells me what pin and what color the wires are. So for instance, if I want to look at, obviously starter 7, ignition's 5, water temperature 3. I'm not going to read this to you. This is a nice chart. These wire colors are standardized. Okay, if you see yellow, red on a marine wiring harness, that's automatically the crank signal. If you see tan, it's automatically water temperature. You see blue, it's oil pressure. That's one handy thing. Those have been wire colors for many, many years. ABYC, American Boating and Yacht Council. They're kind of like a governing group of marine stuff. So this is handy, especially if you're working on stuff 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, which my assumption is most of us are going to be working on. All right, this is a late model Crusader. Things are a little different, okay? They have a different connector, all right? And this is your power and ground. And here's the cheat sheet, okay? Now, one other thing I'll mention is when you have an engine that's electronic throttle, I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, but if you got like a 2010 Volvo Pen, a 2007 with electronic throttle, you're in trouble because EVC, you're not going to be able to run it in the shop because the crank signal, all that goes through the J1939 bus. So you're at a huge disadvantage. So the motor would have to go back in the boat. And unfortunately, Volvo Penta has like 5 or 6 different versions of EVC, which is electronic vessel control. Mercury, you can get them to start and run, but they'll idle. You can't rev them up unless you have SmartCraft and DTS and a command module and so forth. So that kind of sucks a little bit. Their stuff is a little bit more forgiving. You can make stuff work, but those are some things going forward that I'm going to talk about here in a second that on newer engines is going to be a little hard, But I just want that information out there so you can see how we do this stuff. All right. So basically, these newer CAT engines, the wiring is all over the place. Different manufacturers have different stuff. And just like this Volvo Penta, okay, this Volvo Penta non-EVC engine, okay, which has still a mechanical throttle and shift cable, has this 14 pin on EGC stuff, which is 06, 07 and up. So, and here's your cheat sheet, right? If I wanted ignition, purple, start, and look, pin 5 and 7 are still the same. See, yellow, red, purple, those wire colors on this are still the same traditional wire colors. So you could take a jumper wire and I can go right here to pin 5, and fire it up and I should hear my fuel pumps run. So this is what I do when we run an engine. This is a pair of 6-liter Crusaders we did earlier this spring. And obviously you can see it's running. But one of the things I do is I don't force water into the engine if it's an inboard engine. If it has a raw water pump, I let it take it out of the bucket. You see I got a garden hose pumping into the bucket. And you see we got a little hillbilly recirculation going on here, right? We're dumping the water right back into my 5-gallon bucket because a garden hose cannot, at least in our town, cannot supply enough water, even at idle for most of these engines. Now, it's okay to run dry and suck some air. It doesn't hurt anything. There's no load on the engine. But this deal right here is the way to do it. I've got a hose connected to the water pump going right into my 5-gallon bucket. I let the engine take what it wants. That to me, that's the best. I see guys that put the garden hose in, start the engine up. And if you've got a cheapy garden hose, it's going to suck that hose shut because that water pump suction is going to pull that hose shut. Now you're not going to get any water. Now you're smoking the impeller, yada, yada. Let it take the water out of the bucket. If it's an IO engine, Merc Cruiser specifically, or an old OMC, then you are going to have to take the garden hose and hook it up to the intake hose and force it through because the water pump is in the out drive. If it's an Alpha drive or a Cobra, something like that, okay? Volvo engines usually have the water pump mounted to the crankshaft. So the Volvo drives never had the water pump in the drive. So they always have a raw water pump, kind of like a traditional inboard engine. But I start them up. If we got to break the cam in, I do all that stuff right here. This is why I like to have everything on the engine. I want to run it, right? Because if something goes wrong, I want, they're always going to blame us, right? We're the machine shop. So I want to make sure I start it up, I prime the engine, the whole smash, right? We'll get into how we check timing on some of these and that later. But this is what I want. I burp the cooling system. I run them for about an hour, depending on the situation. I can check the transmission operation. because we rebuild transmissions here. So most of the time I'm going through the transmissions at the same time. I make sure all that stuff works. We check for leaks, and then at that point we can deliver it to our customer. But we're not done yet because we got to sea trial it. But I just want to give you an overview of how we run these engines. Okay. Let's talk about water reversion. All right. Now you can see this old Gen 5 big block here, looks like it come out of the Titanic. All right. Now, obviously it's sat around, but I can see water on all these cylinders. You can see where it was kind of sitting. We actually did salvage this and fix it. But I want to talk about some popular causes. Number one, I see technicians and boat owners make the same mistake. They get an engine that's got water in the oil and or the cylinders, and they automatically rip the heads off. They automatically think it's like burning their brain. It's like, oh, there's water in the cylinder. It's got to come from the head gas. Got to come from the cracked head. Got to be a cracked cylinder. Got to be whatever. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. When you have a situation like this, the first thing to do, obviously, is take the spark plugs out, figure out who's got water, and try to apply a little bit of common sense. I mean, if I've got water on 4 cylinders, okay, on the same bank, all right, what's the odds that I have a blown head gasket in 4 different places? Okay, if it's blown from here to here, here to here. I mean, could that happen? Yes, but this thing had to be Chernobyl. I mean, this thing had to overheat so bad or screw up. The chances are that's not the case. It's not the case, right? This water had to come from somewhere else, specifically the exhaust, okay? Could have came from the carburetor too if this thing was outside and the air cleaner wasn't on or something like that, the flame arrestor. But, common sense says, wait a minute, how can I have water all over and that much water? So we'll talk about that. First thing is I have to have a minimum of 15 inches I'm looking for from the top of the riser to the water line, okay? That's number one. A lot of boats, especially if it's a repower situation, nobody seems to check this. If my exhaust riser is below that number, I mean, Crusader says 12, there's but 12, 15 is good. Obviously, if this exhaust is lower in the water, okay, and this riser is lower, I have more of a chance of getting water into my nice new engine. So I'll show you how to check it, but that is very important. That is always step one, especially if you're not sure what's going on a repower situation, is check the height, the top of this riser to the water line, all right? And again, this is just another picture of the same thing, just kind of hit the point home. A lot of these engines, customer, let's say it's a big cruising boat, right? Might have a stand-up refrigerator in it, they get 2 dogs, they got 2 coolers of beer, we got steaks for the weekend, we got 40 people on board, we're tearing it up, and all of a sudden that weight brings that down, okay? And this should always be checked with the normal load that the customer has on the boat, okay? So, with the dock lines, everything, waste tank, water tank, some of these boats got a lot of weight in them, and that's why I want to check this. If I got some kind of repeat issue, this needs to be checked. Okay, and I'm not going to read this to you. This is how you do it. You use a hose. You put I usually use water. All right, and I basically put this in below the water line, and I can tell right there once I bring it up past here where my water is, and then I get a ruler, okay, and I measure from a yardstick or whatever, and measure from here to here, okay, and that's how I make it. Like I say, all the steps how to do this are right here. I stole this out of a Mercury service manual. It's handy. This isn't super common, but a lot of us build custom engines and custom boats, and we got water in the engine. We don't know why, and I see this get forgotten. It can always be the boat. It doesn't have to be the engine. It can always be the boat. Here's another source of problems, specifically Mercruiser. All right, there is a flapper in this Y pipe. Okay, this is on stern drive or IO engines. Okay. This is bolts to the transom assembly, okay, and this is the exhaust obviously coming out the back door. Well, there is one in here too. I know this picture I stole out of a parts book, but there's one on each side. This little flapper is there to prevent reversion. Let's say I'm up on plane, I'm skiing, I'm doing whatever, and all of a sudden I pull the throttle back or the engine stalls or whatever. All of a sudden I got this big rush of water going up against the transom because the boat's up on plane, all of a sudden it stops, and I got this big rush of water. Well, these flappers, all right, are supposed to seal. Not like this one. This is a bad one. But it's supposed to seal to keep the water out of coming up through the engine. Because on diesel, we obviously can have some, vacuum in the exhaust. So that's what this is for. A lot of times these engines overheat, right? The impellers go bad in the outdrive or whatever, and nobody checks this. And all of a sudden we got weird issues. We're tearing up starter teeth. We're bending rods. We got water in the cylinders. We got water in the oil, you name it. Any or above those are complaints, need to check these shutters. If the manifolds have been pressure tested, which we covered in the last installment, this is something to look for, very, very common. This is a boat I was just involved with not too long ago. This thing overheated, okay? And you can see, I know it's dark in here, but you can see it tuliped the valve, all right? But long story short, look at that wide open area here. That flapper's not doing anything. It's not doing anything to prevent reversion. Now, I didn't have reversion in this engine, but when the cylinder heads came off this, obviously it's the first thing I look at. And I want you as a machine shop, or you as a boat owner, or you, whoever's listening, I want you to look at a situation like this and go, hey, I've got water, I've got a stern drive Merc. Did you guys check the flappers, right? Anybody look at that stuff? Because a lot of times these things get overheated so bad, nobody checks anything, all of a sudden they got water. And what do? Rip the heads off. Okay, here we go. You see where I'm going with this? This stuff needs to be checked before anything happens, okay? I can tell you Mercury has an issue on certain 8.1 liter engines that they actually have a service bulletin. They want those flappers changed every 100, I think, hours on some specific formulas like 39 PCs, because these things are getting beat up and the engines kind of sit low in the boat, and they're tearing up starters, they're tearing up flywheels, and these flappers are bad. And Mercury released a bulletin and says that this is kind of a maintenance item on some of these 8.1 stern drive engines. So just want you to be aware of it. This part number here, 807-166A1, doesn't fit everyone, okay? But this is what a new flapper valve kit looks like. Okay, it's got a shaft in there, 2 little plugs. Basically what you do is you take this hose off, this oblong hose. There's 2 hose clamps down there. You slide that hose up. You take a screwdriver, you pry this guy out. There's little rubber guys. It takes 2 seconds to change them once the riser's off. But this not too expensive part can cause havoc. Okay, and here's one of the havocs, right? Missing teeth on the flywheel, right? What else can cause that? Yes, could be ignition system, such as a crossfire, engaging the starter when it's running, or obviously some other counteracting force, which would be fuel, water, hydrolock situation. I'll be honest with you, you can put 48 volts that starter, it's never going to cut those teeth. It's not going to break starter drives, not going to break nose cones, none of that. Okay. And here's an example, right? This is a Ford starter. It was a pleasure craft. It was in a correct craft ski boat, right? You can see the starter's kind of new. Okay. So what happens is the customer will look at this, or a machine shop, whatever, and go, oh, the starter, it's just a piece of junk, right? So they bolt a new one in, they slam dunk that in, and maybe it starts fine, maybe it doesn't. And all of a sudden it blows it up again, right? Bends the armature shaft sometimes, breaks these teeth. That is a counteracting force. Like I said, I could put 48 volts that starter. It is not going to break that nose cone. Absolutely no way. You're cranking that engine over. It came up against something it can't compress. Obviously, a liquid of some sort generally. Could be ignition, other stuff. But when you got issues like this, that's the first thing you need to do is pull the spark plugs. Pull all the spark plugs and rotate the engine and see if you got water shooting out of any holes. Don't you dare put another starter on without doing that first, because it's not going to last. Something's up. It just didn't wake up today and go, huh, I guess I'm just going to fracture in 2 pieces. No, it does not work that way. Let's talk about detonation. Okay, I stole this out of a Mercury service manual. I'm not going to read it to you, but they've got some pictures on pre-ignition and detonation. All right, and basically what they say, I didn't highlight this, but look at this right in the Mercury service manual. They're basically saying, look, engine failures from detonation or pre-ignition aren't our fault, meaning Mercury Marine, and there's no warranty. And this is true. If you can buy a brand new $30-some thousand engine, 8.1 liter, all right? They still make some. And if you don't follow the procedure, it doesn't run right. When it comes time for a warranty consideration, I don't care if it's got a 3-year warranty, they can KO the warranty, because they're going to say, hey, listen, this is detonation. Detonation is induced. Detonation is not a mistake. It's usually not a mistake by an engine builder or components. you induce detonation. Okay, boat's not running right, fuel sucks, the prop's overdone, the boat's heavy. We're going to address those types of things. Okay, and obviously they talk about improper use of fuels, and then they give you a little list here too. Okay, and they're right, because if you overhaul an engine, it's got a hole in the piston or something like that, and the customer doesn't, or especially if you're just doing a long block. This is why the C trail is so important. We're going to talk about coming up here. If we don't do this right, we're going to get that engine back with holes in it again. And the customer's going to blame us, the machine shop, and go, hey, you didn't do your job right. Okay. And it's pretty hard. Once you collect the money the first time, it's always hard to collect the money the second time, right? Because the customer automatically thinks, especially in today's day and age, that you screwed something up, right? This isn't my fault. I wrote a check for $15,287.16, right? This is your problem. Okay. This is why we got to sea trial the boat. We got to make sure of this. Right. I cannot stress how important this is. Obviously, it's detonation. I'm not going to read it to you. Just more failures of it. All right. And here's an engine I got in the shop actually last week. All right. And I'll cut to the chase. The problem is somebody selected the wrong long block. Okay. And you can see this is the major thrust side of the piston. All this scuffing. Okay. And you can see this is a brand new piston. This is somebody's reman. I don't know who it is. Doesn't matter. It's not the reman's fault. Okay. But you can see this piston's probably got about 10 minutes on it, if that, right? There's no carbon. You can see everything. Okay. But what happened is this is a fuel injected Crusader. It happens to be a Gen 5 454 340 horse. Excuse me. The problem is somebody selected the 385 horse. So probably when they went online and bought an engine, and it's in a 11-meter Trojan, bigger boat. And my guess what happened, I don't know who was involved. The Marine I'm working for or doing the work for, they just brought us the engine. Of course, the customers knew, just bought the boat. Nobody knows anything. But I can tell by looking at this, because I didn't take a picture of the top of the piston, but it's got that mini dome piston, and it's got the rectangle port heads, which is typically the 385 horse 7.4, right? 454. Well, they brought me the injectors to clean. They brought me a throttle body. I'm like, wait a minute. I said, I don't remember rectangle port heads on a throttle body. I said, Crusader didn't make that package, right? Well, what happened is somebody put a 385 horse long block on a 340 horse computer system with throttle body, and nobody checked it. There's no way in hell this thing could have ran right. And guess what happened? Kaboom, right? This engine can't have, I don't think it's got 2 hours on it, And the problem is nobody sea trialed the boat, nobody followed up, okay? And I know this kind of stuff can be tricky, but the problem is an engine builder, and this came into us as a long block, okay? If the marina brings in a long block and I just build it to what it had, right? The mini dome pistons, the right, the rectangle heads, all that, the right cam, and we give it back to our customer and nobody sea trials it, nobody follows up, guess what happens? This is a boomerang, right back, okay? But luckily I started asking questions and I'm like, this is no bueno here. Something's messed up. So I had this twin engine boat. I said, man, did somebody do this to the other side? Turns out they didn't. I had them bore scope it, make sure it was a flat top piston, and that looked like it was. They sent me pictures. You could tell it was unmolested. So we're going to go ahead and take this engine and we're going to make it a 340 horse. We'll put the correct peanut port heads on it, and we'll fix it up, because that ECM, obviously is programmed to this setup. And again, carbureted engines, you could probably get away with something like this, but you can see this is new, so you just got to be careful. And if you're not sure, you got my email address, send me serial number, send me pictures. Maybe I can try to decipher what you have, okay? This happens to be an old Chrysler 318, okay? Look at the pre-ignition damage here, right? This thing was overpropped. I knew that because when I got to rebuild the engine and went for a sea trial, we were 600 RPM from the top, right? This thing only turned like 3,300 RPM. It was a 28 Marinette Sportsman. And if we didn't get the boat prop correctly, guess what's going to happen? We're going to open up some more holes in here more likely, There's the piston side of that engine, right? Ring lands are all smashed, everything, pre-ignition issues, it was an overpropped. And like I say, I can't stress this enough. You got to sea trial this boat. Somebody does, especially when you have detonation situations. I mean, obviously, if it's a froze block and the guy didn't winterize it, or some other type of failure, you broke an oil hose and it pumped all the oil out and ruined the engine, that's one thing. But when it comes to pre-ignition detonation damage, you got to see throughout the boat. You gotta. Here's another one. This is engine just came in not too long ago, right? Look, it blew the head gasket in between the two here, between 5 and 7, which is very common anyway, and pre-ignited a hole. And here's what happened on this deal, okay? The guy hit a submerged object, okay? Dented the prop. He didn't want to call the towboat, right? What's he do? Puts the hammer down, right? And he didn't even make it in. He still had to call the towboat, okay? But he ruined the engine, all right? So he nailed the prop on a rock pile out here out in Lake Erie, and he said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and run it home. Well, guess what? He ran 10 grand out of his wallet too doing it, So again, it's not the piston's fault. It's not the head gasket's fault, right? It's not the valve's fault. None of this is the engine's fault. That's what I'm trying to hit home here. Okay, this is the same cylinder head on this. Look at that, ground electrode's gone, right? Chunk out of the head, lots of issues here. Same stuff, right? There's the head gasket, okay? There's the head, that's the head too. Blow a chunk, look at that. It's like a blowtorch blew right between there, okay? It's all detonation. Again, not the engine's fault, not the engine builder's fault, all right? This is all boat-related problems taking this stuff out. Fuel system, propping, any of that. Tulip valve, okay? This is a set of heads that actually just came in a couple weeks ago, but I like the picture, okay? And you can see daylight here, okay? This thing had no compression in cylinder number 7, obviously, okay? But I didn't show you a picture of the other side of the head, but you can imagine that obviously a loss of compression like that. Again, is that the valve's fault? No. I can put the best valves in the world in, and you know what? If I put the best valves in the world and they don't tulip, something else is going to go out, right? Maybe it burns a hole in the piston deck or something like we just saw. Something's got to give in a situation like this, okay? Fuel systems. Obviously, in anything that does not run a lot, most of us are boaters, including myself. We don't use a boat like a car. And what I mean by that is when you have a situation where something sits around, obviously fuel storage is always an issue. Okay, the fuel goes bad, especially with ethanol today. We can have all kinds of issues when it comes to fuel. And some people think that hauling their own fuel, they save money. Okay, and yes, you do. Okay, but obviously this gentleman here, filling up his boat, is getting fuel from the gas pump. Okay. And that can cause some issues, okay, especially on something that doesn't run. You only run it 4 or 5 times a year or something like that, run heavy. There's some things to consider. And one of them is the ethanol content. A lot of marinas have 91 no ethanol. That's what I put in my boat. But I want to just show you this real quick, that look at what happens when you put 10% ethanol, all right? We talk about this detonation situation. And one of the downfalls with ethanol is obviously it changes my stoichiometric and it runs a little bit leaner. So if I build an engine that's on the edge, or the prop is on the edge, or the boat's a little heavy or whatever, and I'm running fuel that's got a little bit of ethanol in it, or I bought it, on the pump, gas pump for my car, I just basically have installed a leaner situation into my engine. Okay, so just be careful, right? Just be careful. I'm not saying every time anybody that hauls fuel is going to have problems. I'm not making that blanket statement, but every boat is different. Okay, and you'll see this valve tech thing here, right? If you've been boating for a while, many marinas advertise this valve tech. It's an additive. I'll be honest with you, at these marinas, the gas comes right out of the refinery, okay, and then when they dump it in the tank, they have a little bottle of something they actually dump right in the tank after they're done dumping their load. Okay, so it is an additive package, but I think it's really good for corrosion and some other stuff. Again, this is not a commercial. I'm not paid by Valve Tech. I just want you to know what the difference is when you might be paying a little bit more for fuel than you are at a gas. When gas is $3 a gallon on the street and it's $4.99 at the marina, it's not always the marina gouging you. Okay, so there's some differences. Storage capability, ethanol may not be there. Kind of handy to know. All right. This is an Orbidor for fuel filter off a Crusader. The reason I put this in here is this is an engine that I overhauled this year, okay? And it was out of a 31 Tierra. But look at all this junk, okay? And my point is here, if you're just doing a long block guy or something like that, you know, how would you like to put this back on your fresh long block, right? That would suck, right? How do you think what do you think those fuel injectors look like, right? I mean, if it's carburetor, what do you think that the carburetor looks like? You know, you've got to make sure the job is done completely, especially if it's detonation. You know, if I had those holy pistons that I just had a few slides ago, and I got this fuel filter like this, what do you think this tank looks like? Okay, I mean, the tank's, something's going on here, right? It looks like grass. I don't know what it is. You know, this is a cleanable screen. These things are over $100. This is a stainless steel screen, and I've never changed one. I've always cleaned them, but we call them a pancake filter. Very common on Crusaders in the 1990s and early 2000s. But it's a real narrow pancake unit. But look at this. Would you say that could cause an engine failure prematurely? Absolutely. You know. Here's some more stuff I took out of a fuel filter of a 2004 6-liter Crusader a few years back. Look at this crap. You know, I beat this out with right on the deck of the boat, and this boat actually wouldn't run up. The starboard engine, it would come up on speed, and after about half hour or so, 20 minutes, or 25 obviously, the starboard engine would slow down. This thing was had a huge fuel restriction, you know. So I told this, luckily I didn't do any engine damage, but you know, when you have issues like this, you know, pretend that was a fresh motor that we just did, or you just did, or you bought a long block for someplace, right? The motor doesn't run up. The first thing you want to do is call the place that did the engine. Well, wait a minute, maybe it's the boat, you know? And there's fuel tank polishing services, and that's what happened. These filters got clean. We have a local service here that polishes fuel tanks, and he paid that gentleman. He cleaned his tanks. He's been running the boat the last 2 years with no problems. So, but again, I want to know this, okay? The other thing I do too is if you have a spin-on water separator, I did not put this in the presentation, is one of the things I always do, even when the engine's running good, is I unscrew that water separator and I dump it in a bucket, right? And I'm looking for water or junk. You know, it is free, right? All you need is an oil filter wrench, spin that thing off, dump it in the bucket, look at it, right? If the fuel's nice and clean, we're good to go, right? But if I'm doing a C-trial engine, I dump that, you know, especially if it's not running right or something like that, and it's full of water, we ain't going anywhere till that's fixed, okay? There's some fuel injectors off an 8.1. I can see the restriction. I mean, you can see the junk in there, okay? Horrible, you know? And this is something else, you know? Fuel injectors, I don't see too much trouble on vehicles, but on boats with the crappy fuel, they sit around, it's all the time. I mean, look at this. Not one of these has the same flow rate, I don't think. You know, that's a huge problem. You know, we're fortunate we clean our own injectors here. This happened to be a 5.7 GXI Volvo Penna that tuliped an intake valve, all right? And luckily the marina we're working with brought the injectors in and he had that. Now, how do you think if we were just on those cylinder heads, put them back on and take it back out, right? It could have a repeat failure. That's huge. It's a huge issue, okay? So if you don't have an injector service, you know, find one, right? Require the marina to do it, right? You get heads that are screwed up, you get blocks or, you know, detonation. Don't be afraid to ask them, are you getting the injectors clean? You know, do you know somebody that tests them? You know, they got to answer these questions, you know, because guess what? If it tulips that valve or detonates that piston again, guess who gets it for a phone call? Me, right? And then all of a sudden, again, it's hard to get money out of the customer the second time, you know. It's an old adage I love to use, right? A gentleman taught me this years ago because we do automatic transmissions here, some of them. And he always told me, he says, Chris, make sure you get the customer to buy it, right? So like when you're rebuilding a transmission, you think that sun gear shell is bad, and it kind of engines is that way too, right? You know, you want to get that up front, because if you don't do it the first time and it fails, guess who's buying it the second time? Me, okay? Same thing here. We don't want to be in an argument or a situation with a customer that has a repeat failure and we find out it's dirty fuel injectors, okay? Nobody wants to pay the bill on that. The customer sure doesn't. The marina, you know, it's just a bad situation. But if you educate your customer and say, hey, listen, has this been done? It's pretty hard for him to come back to the machine shop, correct? You know, did you get those injectors checked? No, they were fine. Or, oh, you know, they got to do it. They got to do it. So we'll jump right into my C-trial procedure, okay? And again, you've heard me say this obviously for 3 episodes now. I always like to C-trial the boat, and this is why, okay? And I'm going to go through this, all right, step by step. This is what I do. So obviously we test run the engine of the boat, all right. It's D-Day, as I like to call it. We launch the boat, and this is the first thing I do. Boat's in the water, we check all the fluids. That obviously that's self-explanatory, kind of common sense, but you'd be surprised, okay? Because the other thing we do here in the shop is we don't know how that engine sits in the boat. So a lot of times I don't top off the transmission or top off the oil pan because it's harder to take oil out than it is to put it in, okay? So I always double check that, okay? We start, make sure it's pumping water. Easy way to tell is I put my hand on the exhaust riser. Hands on the exhaust, right? The exhaust, and that's one point I want to make too, if you want to make a note. The exhaust should always be cold, right? When I'm on a riser, I don't care if I'm on a closed cooled engine or a raw water cooled engine. Those exhaust hoses, those top risers where the exhaust is coming out, there's got to be water through there 24/7. If that engine's running, water has to be going through that exhaust. I should always be able to keep my hand on that, okay? So I'm always doing that. The next step is I verify all the gauges work. You know, if I start the engine up, we warm it up, or oil pressure too, and if that oil pressure gauge is stuck on 0 or it's pegged at 80, and that temperature gauge is pegged at 240 or doesn't move, we ain't going anywhere, okay? Because if that temperature gauge doesn't work and there's something wrong, whether it's our fault or not, the customer may not ever know that, okay? And that's something that we'll make the installer do, right? Because if the temp gauge doesn't seem like it's working, no bueno, we don't leave, okay? What's the point of the gauges if they don't work? You'd be surprised on how many boats gauges that do not work. It's crazy, all right? And here's why. And some of these have alarms too. If it has an alarm, we try to check that. And I realize probably most people listen here aren't marine technicians, okay? But this is something as an engine builder that I'm going to show you what I would do. I would sea trawl the boat, all right? And you're going to charge them for it. We ain't doing this for free, okay? And I'm going to get to that in a minute. But, you know, you need to tell them, hey, that oil pressure gauge don't work. You know, hey, Mr. Marine Mechanic or Mr. Customer, whatever, this needs fixed. You're going to call me back when this thing's fixed. You're going to hire somebody or you're going to fix it yourself or whatever, and then let me know. We're not going anywhere, okay? I love to have a secondary tack on hand, okay? You'd be surprised how many marine tacks aren't right, okay? A lot of times you knock on, the needle moves while you're running. They're terrible, okay? You know, it's always best to have two opinions, okay? Obviously, if it's fuel injected, a scan tool works the best. You know, there's nothing wrong. Like I said, if you're working with a marina, there should be somebody from the marina or the service facility who put the engine in go on the sea trail too. It's always best to have the owner, okay? I always like to have the owner run the boat. He knows the boat better than anybody. It's his boat. I like to have the owner, the engine builder, and or the installer. That's Chris's opinion on who should be on the sea trail, okay? All those people, because that way, if there's issues, you got the machinist and the marine tech there, they can put their heads together and say, hey, is this right or wrong? Or the customer say, yeah, you know, it doesn't do this the way it should or whatever. But if you've got all that, that mitigates problems down the road. And that stops this ever since stuff, right? Because one of the first things a customer likes to do is ever since, right? Ever since you put this motor in, ever since this thing got rebuilt, it doesn't do this or it doesn't do that. When you sea trawl first out of the gate and the customer walks off the boat and says, yeah, this thing runs good, the ever since line is null and void, okay? Because if he says ever since, how come you didn't tell me that when we sea trawled it, right? Or, hey, we took the boat out, it ran 4,200, it was 140 degrees, the oil pressure was 60, right? It stops that ever since junk, okay? So I always like a second tack. I always take a second tack. I don't care how good the boat is, how new the vessel is. I don't care if it's a brand new, I always take, you know, if it's, like say, it's EFI, I'm taking my scan tool. If not, you can, you know, an inductive timing light. I mean, come on, a Harbor Freight timing light for $100 has a tack readout, you know, so something else to verify the tack because the top RPM is important. We're going to get to that in a second. Obviously, once the engine's warmed up, we look for leaks. We check they're cool. Again, we're always checking those risers, make sure they're cool. I actually check them on the sea trawl too, okay? And obviously, we hand out to the water, you know, once we're in a no wake zone or whatever we're at, you know, I bring it up to cruising speed, okay? And I will tell you that most cruising speeds are about 75% of wide open throttle. Obviously, you know, every boat's different, and I'm going to make a blanket statement here, but a lot of older boats, 28 to 3,200 RPM, if it's carbureted right before the 4-barrel kicks in, is a good spot. I'm usually there for about 5-10 minutes, depending on what's going on, depending on lake conditions, and depending on what I see, okay? But this is what I'm looking at. I'm always looking at the gauges. I'm checking for vibrations, make sure this thing's aligned correctly. Okay. Noises, obviously. I'm always making sure those risers are cool. Just kind of bebop around, listen to the engine. How's it sound? You know, if everything's good there, I tell them to go ahead and accelerate to wide open throttle. All right. And once we go there and we make sure the tabs are up and so forth, and your boat operator should be able to do this, or most marinas have a pretty good boat captain or marine service facilities. You know, if you don't want the customer to go with you, that's fine. But somebody, you got to have more than one person. The guy C-Trail on the boat, the mechanic, is not the guy that should be checking the engine out. It's too hard to drive, pay attention, and look, see what's going on. That is another recipe for disaster. So 2 people minimum on this C-Trail. All right. But this is what I'm doing, right? This is my procedure. I go to wide open throttle. I verify it reaches the RPM. Now your question is, Chris, what's the top RPM? Excellent question. Almost every modern engine has a sticker on it, okay? And it'll tell you what the recommended wide open throttle is. And we covered this on part 1 of our seminar here back in April or May or whatever we started. And it's very important that the boat is propped correctly. And I will tell you a Chris's opinion, it's always best to prop it on the high end of the scale. So if you've got a sticker that says, you know, hey, 4,000 to 4,400, which is some older boats, right? Newer boats, you know, 44 to 46, 44 to 48. High horsepower stuff, right? 48 to 5,200. These LS engines, like those 6.0s, those things get propped to 5,600. Okay. And then you're going to be running the boat probably 441, 4,200, something like that, depending on the vessel. But we got to go out and make sure this thing runs wide open, because even though we may not be running wide open all the time, at least I hope he's not, you know, if there's an issue where this thing can't achieve wide open throttle, something's wrong, right? Fuel restriction, prop screwed up. Maybe I got something wrong on our engine we just did, or, you know, fuel, whatever, ignition timing, you name it. Okay. But it's very important that this gets done, because I cannot stress how, you know, guys don't take stuff to wide open throttle and we're 1,000 RPM off, and then we have a repeat situation. Okay, we got detonation, we got blown head gaskets, the whole smash. So this is what I want to do. Obviously, the reason why I prop it on the top end or suggest is many times when I'm there, we don't have all the stuff that goes with it, right? The 10 people, the 4 cases of beer, you know, the pop, water, you name it, the coolers of fish, you know, full fuel, you know, water tank, the septic tank, all that stuff, you know. So, you know, we try to do this is what the customer would normally run the boat at, because obviously the more weight we put in this vessel, the less RPM it's going to attain. And if this guy's running this boat with all this stuff, you know, that's very important. So I just want you to keep that in mind. And the last thing I'm going to do, and everything's good, obviously we back it off and we run it for a little bit more, and then we head back to where we came from, and then we sign off on it and everybody's good. But this is something I want to hit home on. When we do a complete engine like that, we offer a 1-year warranty, okay? 1 season warranty. If they don't call us for the sea trial, there's no warranty, none, no questions asked. It's in our procedure. I can't stress this enough, okay? We have to go on the boat. If we don't go on the boat, it's over. I don't care, okay? Because I want to verify our work. Now, obviously, we do car repair here. Obviously, taking a car for a short test drive, you know, it's a lot easier to verify if things are right or wrong, all right? And a boat is a lot harder. But you know what? You got to charge for it. And you know what? If your customer balks at that, you don't want him as a customer anyway, because he's probably going to be a pain. But I would think a customer, this is value. You know, if I just wrote a check for $10,000, $20,000 or whatever for motors in my boat, and the shop that did the work wants to come and sea trial it as a customer, I would honor that. I'm like, absolutely. This guy cares about his work. He wants to make sure this thing runs good. Absolutely. You know, absolutely. And here it is on a bill. Here's how I handle it, right? Most of the time it takes me 2 hours. Okay. So right here, item number 67 on this bill is sea trial the vessel. Obviously, and I hope your shop is too, nothing leaves the shop unless it's paid for. Okay. When the customer pays the bill, he already paid for this. Okay. He already paid for the sea trial. Simple, right? It's already on the bill. It's already factored in, you know, and when he approves the estimate, it's right there. It's right in front of God and everybody. Okay. We explain that to the customer. We want to sea trial. If you take this boat and don't call me first, and we don't verify that these cages work, the boat's propped right, why should I be responsible?